On the night of May 3, 1996, a 17-year-old girl in Sitka, Alaska, left her sister's birthday party and started walking home alone along the trail, a distance of about 1 mile. It was her 17th birthday, and it was the last time she was seen alive. Her body was found 2 days later, buried in a shallow grave dug under a fallen tree in the woods. The attacker's DNA was collected from her body and clothing, preserved in the lab, and over the next 24 years, investigators across generations compared it to more than 100 potential suspects. None matched. One man confessed to killing her, was put on trial in 1997, and was acquitted. In 2019, when the Alaska State Troopers uploaded the DNA profile to a public genealogy database and 2 genetic genealogists built a complex family tree, the results pointed directly to a man in Arkansas. And what happened when investigators knocked on his door shocked everyone involved in a way no one could have imagined. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you like videos like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Spring 1996 came to Sitka, Alaska, with the damp chill of southeast Alaska and the peaceful atmosphere of a small harbor town surrounded by the Tongass Forest and the Pacific Ocean. Houses along Sawmill Creek Road had their lights on in the evenings. Fishing boats were docked at the harbor, and everything happened exactly as it always did in Sitka, quiet and familiar, where 8,000 people knew each other by name, and there was no reason to worry when a child walked home alone at night, because this was Sitka, and violent crime barely existed here. Jessica Baggen grew up in this town. She knew every road, every trail, every familiar face at the harbor and at school. The person her obituary would later describe as a true Sitka kid who loved fishing and cooking, and was known to friends and family for the independence and free spirit of someone who grew up confident in her own town. On May 3, 1996, Jessica Baggen turned 17, and that evening she celebrated her birthday with friends and family at her sister's house in Sitka, a normal 17-year-old girl's party in a small town, with nothing to worry about. No reason for anyone in that room to think this would be the last night they saw her. After midnight, Jessica decided to walk home, about a 1-mile distance along the bike trail that ran through the woods near the Sheldon Jackson College campus on Sawmill Creek Road, a path she knew in the town where she grew up on her 17th birthday. No one at the party was worried when she left alone. Jessica's parents woke up the next morning and discovered she had not come home. They waited. Maybe she had slept over at her sister's after the party. But as the hours passed with no contact, no messages, no calls from Jessica or her sister or any friends saying she was there, her father reported it to the Sitka Police Department early on the morning of May 5. He returned to the police station that same evening to confirm with officers that she still had not come home and had no contact with anyone in the family or her friends. The Sitka Police Department mobilized the local search and rescue team, focusing on the woods west of the Indian River between the Sheldon Jackson College campus and Sawmill Creek Road, along the trail Jessica had chosen to walk home on her birthday night. The bike trail along Sawmill Creek Road ran through the Tongass Forest with dense spruce and hemlock trees, dark patches where streetlights didn't reach. Jessica Baggen walked onto that trail after midnight on May 3, 1996, and never walked out. On May 6, 1996, 2 days after Jessica Baggen walked onto the trail, searchers found the shirt she had been wearing when last seen, lying in the woods near the bike trail, close to the Sheldon Jackson College campus. Less than 2 hours later, Jessica Baggen's body was found, buried in a shallow grave dug under a fallen tree in the Tongass Forest not far from the trail, hastily covered in the way of someone who wanted to hide evidence but didn't have enough time. Most of her clothing and belongings were found scattered around the area. The autopsy determined that Jessica had been sexually assaulted and strangled to death. The 17-year-old woman who had just celebrated her birthday the day before, who was walking home on a path she had known since childhood, was killed in the woods and buried under a fallen tree by someone who lived in the same town of 8,000 people as her. During the autopsy, the medical examiner discovered one additional detail that no one could explain throughout the next 24 years of investigation: a mysterious wound on Jessica's back. It did not match any object or action the investigators could identify. and it was not found in any forensic database or reference material they consulted. Investigator Hunyor, who later worked on the case, kept a photo of that wound on his office door and asked any colleague who walked in if they had any ideas about what could have caused it. Not because it was a lead to a suspect, but because it was a question he could not let go of. "That was one of the things we never figured out," he said later. The murder shocked Sitka in the way only small towns with no history of violent crime can understand. 8,000 people who knew each other by name, where children walked home alone and parents didn't worry, where no one had any reason to think this could happen here to someone everyone knew as Jessica Baggen, the Sitka kid who loved fishing and cooking and knew every road in town. Investigators collected forensic evidence from the body and scene according to procedure. The attacker's DNA was preserved in the lab, the case file was opened, and the search for a DNA match began. A search that would last 24 years and involve comparisons with more than 100 people before the right answer was found. 9 days after Jessica Baggen's body was found in the shallow grave under the fallen tree in the Tongass Forest, a man named Richard Bingham contacted the Sitka Police Department and confessed to sexually assaulting and killing Jessica on the night of May 3, 1996. Bingham was a severe alcoholic who frequently experienced complete blackouts when drunk. And when investigators reviewed the interrogation video, they realized something didn't add up. He had no clear, coherent memory of the crime he was confessing to, no details that only the person who actually did it would know, but rather details from someone who had heard them from another source or read them somewhere, and whose drunk brain had turned them into memories. At the same time, there were too many coincidences to ignore. He knew details that not everyone knew, details about the scene and how the body was hidden that were not public information, and when his boat was searched, investigators found posters of nude women on the bed, a detail not directly legally relevant to the case, but impossible to completely overlook in the overall picture. DNA test results from evidence collected at the scene and from Jessica's body. The DNA did not match Bingham. The man sitting in the interrogation room confessing to killing Jessica Baggen was not her killer. DNA confirmed that. But investigator Tugman later said he understood why the decision was still made to put Bingham on trial despite the DNA mismatch. He knew too much, and there were too many coincidences to dismiss entirely. And in the 1996 legal system with the evidence they had, that decision was not without basis. Bingham's trial for the sexual assault and murder of Jessica Baggen took place in early 1997. The jury reviewed all the circumstantial evidence, watched the interrogation video showing a man with no real memory of the crime he was confessing to, and acquitted Bingham on all charges. After the Bingham trial in 1997, the Sitka Police Department and Alaska State Troopers continued the investigation. In the years that followed, more than 100 people were DNA tested and cleared. 100 times investigators thought this might be the person. 100 tests and 100 times the results came back as non-matches. Jessica's father did not stand on the sidelines, but participated in his own way, paying out of his own pocket for DNA testing for anyone who voluntarily provided a sample, because the system did not have unlimited funding to test everyone, and he could not wait for bureaucratic processes to decide priorities. Her father was always very helpful and appreciative. He even paid out of his own pocket for the DNA testing costs for anyone who gave a sample, Tugman said later. A concise description of a man who lived for many years with an unanswered question and did everything he could within the power of a father, without legal authority or investigative resources. Dave Tugman was the lead investigator on the Baggen case from the early years after 1996, the one who had interrogated Bingham, pursued leads, and lived with the knowledge that Jessica's killer was still out there with DNA that did not match anyone on the growing suspect list. The one who followed Tugman as lead investigator was Hunyor, who had his own way of living with the unanswered questions of the case. He kept the photo of the mysterious wound on Jessica's back on his office door and asked any colleague or detective who walked in if they had any ideas about what could have caused that wound. No one had an answer. In 2013, retired detective Randy McFerrin was hired by CCIU. He reviewed the Baggen file as one of his priorities, knowing that the killer's DNA was still sitting in the lab waiting. and understood that what was missing was not new clues, but new technology to ask the old questions in a different way. While the Sitka Police Department and Alaska State Troopers pursued hundreds of suspects over the years, Steve Allen Branch was living in Sitka, in the same town of 8,000 people, in the same small community, and no one in decades of investigation connected his name to the Baggen case. Branch was not unknown to Sitka police in 1996. In March 1996, a few weeks before Jessica Baggen was killed on her 17th birthday night, the Sitka Police Department had investigated Steve Allen Branch for the sexual assault of another teenage girl who had been jogging alone on a road in Sitka. Same city, same year, same modus operandi. Sexually assaulting a girl who was alone outdoors in a small town where no one thought it could happen. 2 incidents in the same year, in the same town of 8,000 people, involving the same person, and for many decades of investigation afterward, that connection was not seen. In June 1996, 1 month after Jessica was killed, 3 months after the assault on the jogging teenager, Branch was charged and arrested for that sexual assault. The trial took place in 1997. The same year, Richard Bingham was acquitted in the Jessica Baggen murder case. 2 trials, same year, same town, with 2 outcomes. Bingham was acquitted for a murder he did not commit, and Branch was acquitted for a sexual assault that DNA would later confirm he was very likely to have committed. After being acquitted, Branch continued to live in Sitka for more than another decade. In the town where his name had been in the sexual assault investigation file, in the community where Jessica Baggen was killed, never suspected in the Baggen case because nothing in the active investigation file at the time pointed to him. In 2010, Branch left Sitka and moved to Austin, Arkansas, thousands of miles southeast, far from the Tongass Forest, Sitka Harbor, and the trail. In September 2018, 22 years after Jessica Baggen was killed in the Tongass Forest, was along Sawmill Creek Road, the Alaska State Troopers' Cold Case Investigation Unit began testing a new forensic tool that had not existed in a practical, applicable form for criminal investigations just a few years earlier: genetic genealogy. The Alaska State Crime Lab reviewed the DNA collected from the 1996 evidence and determined there was enough material to create an SNP profile, single nucleotide polymorphism profile, a much more detailed DNA profile than the standard ones used in CODIS, detailed enough to search in public genealogy databases where millions of Americans had voluntarily uploaded their DNA to find ancestors, distant relatives, and family origins, not because they were connected to crime, but because they were curious about their family history. In February 2019, the suspect's DNA profile was uploaded to the public database, and 2 genetic genealogists began the work that McFerrin later described as building a very complex family tree from people in the database whose DNA partially matched the suspect's profile. Not the suspect, but distant relatives, second or third cousins, people with no connection to the Baggen case other than sharing some DNA with Jessica's killer. The 2 experts built the family tree in reverse, branch by branch, narrowing the scope until that complex family tree finally pointed to a single name: Steve Allen Branch, the man who had lived in Sitka in 1996, who had been investigated by Sitka PD for the sexual assault of a teenage girl that same year, and who was now living in Austin, Arkansas. In January 2020, CCIU contacted the Arkansas State Police for assistance in obtaining a discarded DNA sample from Branch, from a discarded coffee cup, a cigarette butt, anything he touched and left behind. For many weeks, the Arkansas State Police were unsuccessful. In spring 2020, Sitka PD approached from another angle and obtained a discarded DNA sample from one of Branch's relatives, a sample sufficient to run kinship DNA analysis. The analysis results, completed in May 2020, determined that Steve Allen Branch was highly likely to be the source of the suspect DNA found on Jessica Baggen's clothing and body in 1996. It was time to knock on the door. On August 3, 2020, investigators from the Alaska Bureau of Investigation drove to Steve Allen Branch's home in Austin, Arkansas. The 66-year-old man. They questioned Branch at his home, laying out before him what they had: that the DNA from the 1996 scene evidence matched his genealogy profile, that the kinship DNA from his relative confirmed the connection, that 2 genetic genealogists had built a complex family tree and that tree pointed to him, Branch listened to it all and completely denied any involvement in Jessica Baggen's death, denied that he knew her, denied that he had been on the trail that night of May 3, 1996, denied everything.